What you got for us, Bob?
Well, we wanted to talk about the end times because that seems to be on a lot of people's minds
Well, the
right
signs
now.
are there.
But I kind of wanted to lead off with what may or may not, but should be a word of comfort for us. Jesus talks about it. The last week of his life, he rode into Jerusalem as forecast on what we call Palm Sunday,
Right.
which was also the 10th of the month of Aviv, the first month of the Jewish calendar. That's the day that the Passover lamb was selected every year. It was then taken into the household and kept almost like a pet or a member of the family for 4 days,
Right.
and then killed and eaten as an object lesson on the 14th of the month of Aviv. During that week, Jesus rode in on Palm Sunday, and then he had several days to kill before they actually killed him.
Right.
And he was back and forth between Bethany, walking over the Mount of Olives, and into Jerusalem every day and teaching in the temple. And as he taught in the temple one day, he discoursed on the end of the age and the end times and what to look for. And it was actually 2 segments. It's recorded in Luke 21, Mark 13, and Matthew 24. Matthew 24 and Luke and Mark 13 recorded in essentially the same way. Luke records it a little differently. Jesus is standing in the temple and addressing the crowds. So he's talking to everybody generally, and he's telling them what's going to happen in the near future, up until the point where Jerusalem is going to be overwhelmed and the temple is going to be destroyed, and not one stone is going to be left on top of another. Then, if you have to pay attention as you're reading these 3 narratives. From the other 2 narratives, we find out that Jesus then left the temple. Right. He walked down through the Kidron Valley and apparently was walking up the Mount of Olives to go back to Bethany for the evening, and 3 of his disciples, or 4 of them actually, came to him, and they asked him to elaborate more on these end times that he was talking about. And that would be Peter, James, John, and I think Andrew. Right. So he gave them a private seminar for those 4. Okay. And what he did in the one to the general audience, he was talking about the near-term end times. When the church was being launched, before the Jewish nation was destroyed, the temple was destroyed, and the Jews dispersed. Right. The private seminar he gave to those 4 picked up at that point and forecast further out. Okay. And he said, you're going to be seeing wars and rumors of wars, and it's going to be like birth pains. You know, it's going to come and it's going to hurt, then it'll back off, then it'll get more intense, and then back off, then more intense. Gotcha. And he said, and he also referred back to a passage in Daniel that we'll probably try and talk to a little bit about. He said this is a key sign prior to my returning the second time, and I'll get into that a little bit. Oh man, come on. He said, when you see the abomination that causes desolation spoken of back by the prophet Daniel in the Old Testament, when you see that standing in the holy place where it should not, get out of town, because destruction is coming. And what he was referring to was the Antichrist, who will set himself up, proclaim himself to be God. He's going to initiate or guarantee a covenant between Israel and her enemies, her surrounding enemies. And it doesn't say that he's a principal in the covenant, this Antichrist. What it says is he's going to guarantee that covenant. When you have a covenant oath, you always take it in the name of somebody greater who can guarantee your performance. Right. Apparently, he's going to claim to be that person and say, look, I'm going to establish peace here. I'll guarantee it. Peace, Israel, between you and your enemies. And that will be a 7-year covenant or peace treaty. 3 years into it, halfway into it, he's going to dispense with the Jewish religion. Okay. And the daily sacrifice and the religious temple worker he's going to worship. He's going to step into the Holy of Holies in the Jewish temple, which is why we know there will be another temple there. And he's going to proclaim himself to be God. That act, and he's going to break the covenant.
He's going to break the covenant.
That act right there is what triggers the Great Tribulation, which is not 7 years.
Right.
It's only through the last half of that 7-year period, 3.5 years. And that's where things are going to get so intense that God's going to pour out his wrath on the entire world. And the Antichrist is going to try and wipe out the Jews for the final time. And he's going to get right to the point where he's got Jerusalem surrounded with its armies, and it says the entire world's armies are going to come against the Jewish people.
Listen to what we're saying here.
And against Jerusalem. This is all documented.
This is all documented.
This is probably the most documented period of time in history, including the time when Jesus came the first time.
That's right.
There's so much prophecy concerning this. And at the point where the Jewish people are surrounded, and it looks like Hitler's Holocaust took out about 1/3 of the Jews worldwide.
Right.
It looks like this next one, this final one, is going to take out about 2/3 of the Jews, and about half the city of Jerusalem is going to be carried off. There will come a point when Israel and Jerusalem is surrounded by the armies of the world and the Antichrist, that they finally recognize their error, and they cry out to Jesus Christ.
Yes, yes.
That's the precondition for Jesus coming.
That's right.
And I can go to Hosea. In fact, I think I will.
Come on with it, y'all. Listen to what's happening, because I'm telling you, this thing that's happening in Russia and all of that, it's all leading to what we're talking about. It's prophecy is being fulfilled. Listen.
This is Jesus speaking in the prophetic book of Hosea, and he's speaking to the Jewish people. The entire book of Hosea was God trying to make a point to the Jewish people that you keep forsaking me and you need to cut it out.
Right.
And here's Jesus speaking, Hosea 5:15 to 6:3. He says, I will go away and return to my place until they acknowledge their guilt and seek my face. In their affliction, they will earnestly seek me. And then it's Jewish people talking now, and it says, Come, let us return to the Lord, for he has torn us, but he will heal us. He has wounded us, but he will bandage us. He will revise us after 2 days. He will raise us up on the 3rd day, that we may live before him. Here's my take on that, and I'm probably in a minority on this, but it might just be accurate.
Yeah,
The Bible, in a couple different places, refers to 1,000 years as being a day to the Lord. Now, the Bible also tells us that it's not for us to know the day or the hour of God returning, but that doesn't mean he might not give us a hint of the era. That's I think he might just be doing that here. Amen. It says that, I'm going to return to my place, and after 2 days, which could be a 2,000-year period of time, they're going to seek me. They're going to cry out in their affliction and seek my face, and then I'll return, and then I'll live before them on the 3rd day. That would be the 3rd 1,000-year period, which a lot of Christians will believe will be the millennial kingdom.
Right.
So I think God's giving us a pretty strong indication of the era when he very well may be returning, and it's imminent. But the point I was trying to make here, and this is made throughout a number of prophecies in the Old Bible, in the Old Testament, the Jews have rejected Jesus.
Yes.
And they were cut off for that reason. When Jesus rode into Jerusalem, the day that he presented himself as that Passover lamb on Palm Sunday, he rode in on a donkey and he wept over Jerusalem. And he wept over the Jewish people. And he said, if only you'd been paying attention. You would have recognized the day of my coming, but you missed it. And because you missed it, all this catastrophe, this whole era of catastrophe is going to fall on you. And that's lasted for 2,000 years now. The problem with that is there's a parallel. Jesus, if you read those 3 references I mentioned in Mark 13, Luke 21, and in Matthew 24, you can count the number of times that Jesus says, pay attention, stay awake, Be alert. He's telling us, don't church. He's not talking to the Jewish
Listen
people.
what he's saying. Listen,
he's
y'all.
talking to the church. And
Yes.
he's saying, don't miss the boat.
Don't miss it.
Jesus is coming back twice. He's going to do what we would call a flyover, or the church calls a rapture, where he's going to collect the church by surprise. And the church is going to be out of here. And from that point on, the focus of history is going to be on the nation of Israel and the world coming against it until they reach the point where they're nearly decimated and wiped out, and they realize they missed him, and they cry out.
Hold on. So what about those that are not Jewish, that are not given their repentant of their sin? Where are they at this moment? What is happening with them?
At which moment?
During the part of the rapture, those who are left behind.
Well, if you're not Christian, if you haven't accepted Jesus Christ, you're going to be left behind. And it looks like this, I can't prove and don't know for sure, but it looks like the way to come to Christ after that as a Christian, there will be opportunities, but it's probably going to cost you your life, because I think that's going to launch the period of the Antichrist. And
because he said, if you don't receive the mark of the beast,
he'll take your head.
He's going to take your head.
Yeah.
You won't be able to get food. Listen.
This is
serious.
Well, one of the things in the Olivet Discourses and in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, what he's trying to tell us is get the point across, because he keeps saying, wake up, wake up, wake up, be alert. Same thing he told the Jewish people all the way through the New Old Testament, and they missed it. And we've got a whole lot of people that are sitting on a church pew on Sunday morning and probably don't know Jesus from a pet rock. And they're going to miss the bus because they're not paying attention. And Jesus said, when you see all this distress coming on you in waves that are building like birth pains, he said a couple things. Wake up. And he said, change your focus. Look up, because your redemption is at hand. When you see all this happening, we can know absolutely that Jesus' first return for the church is imminent. It's right on the horizon, and we ought to be exhilarated over that. And the whole point of this would be we're busy planning our retirement, building our 401k, buying a new car, remodeling our house. And I think what Jesus is actually saying, when you see all this stuff happening, change your focus.
Change your focus.
Don't be spending quite so much time on your 401k or your vacation planning and buying a new boat for your lake property. It's time to look up and get prepared. And he told a number of parables, including the parable of the 10 virgins, 5 of whom missed the bus because they didn't have oil for their lamp when the bridegroom came. So he's giving us warning after warning after warning, and we're seeing these birth pains increase all the way around us now. We could be at nuclear war by tomorrow morning with what Putin and Russia is doing over in Ukraine, and our idiot leaders in Washington who pushed them into it and don't have a clue how to fix this. They really don't. These people are criminals and they ought to be arrested, but instead we keep voting them into office. But that's a whole different issue that we're not going to get into. It's important, if we're looking at end time prophecies, to understand just how far off the mark the traditional Christian church is and remains. Roughly 2/3 of the church, I would guess, and I've heard figures that are more like 90%, but I'm guessing it's lower than that because more and more people are waking up and actually looking at their Bible and taking it literally. But there is a theology within the Christian church, and it came out from early on, goes back to at least the era of Constantine when he legalized the Christian religion, and then the Catholic Church grew out of that and so forth. And it's called replacement theology, which says, quite simply, and I would say more pastors than not still embrace this theology. And it says that God wrote off the Jewish people when they rejected him. It even goes as far as to say that there was the Jews that crucified Jesus. And because of that, God cut him off, and the church has now inherited all the promises to the Jewish people. That is utter nonsense. It's bad theology. And until we drop that, we're going to be missing the boat on end times prophecy, because we're not going to understand it. We're going to be looking at everything through the lens of the church inheriting all the Jewish promises, and they don't fit.
You got the 144,000. No, that's no way possible it works like that.
Any common sense reading of the Old Testament says that God has made certain fixed promises to the Jewish people. He's cut them off temporarily during the church age.
That's right.
But once the church is out of here, his focus is going to be back on bringing the Jewish people back.
That's right. Yes.
And what you have to do if you believe in this replacement theology is you have to allegorize probably a third of the Old Testament prophecies. Anything concerning what God is going to do with Israel at the end time doesn't fit. There's actually theologians who are dead serious who think that the Jewish people returning to Israel, reclaiming Israel, declaring themselves as a nation in 1948, now reclaiming Jerusalem and getting ready to build a third temple, they think that's all an accident of history, as if any civilization can be completely destroyed and dispersed for 2,000 years and reconstruct itself. And in the book of Isaiah, God tells us, he asks the question of the prophet Isaiah. He says, can a nation be born in a day?
Yes, come on.
The nation of Israel was born on May 14th, 1948. They declared themselves to be a nation after the UN in November of 47 recognized their right to exist. Then the next day they were attacked by 7 or 8 Arab nations. They survived against all odds, and in May of 1948, Ben-Gurion stood up and said, we're proclaiming ourselves as a sovereign nation.
Listen here, y'all. Listen.
And that nation's name is Israel.
Israel. Yes, it is.
You can't make up odds to predict that that's going to happen.
You're right.
Can't do it. And there's prophecy after prophecy. God promised the land as a land grant to Abraham, to the Jewish people and his descendants, and he delineated the borders of Israel, what they're going to be. They have never grown into those borders, even under David and Solomon. They didn't conquer all the territory that God gave them. Right. That's a permanent land grant. He's going to keep his word.
Yes,
he's going to not only bring them back, but he's going to establish them in their land. He made a permanent covenant, the Davidic covenant with David, and said, it's your descendants and your bloodline.
Yes, come on.
That will sit on the throne of Judah. There is no throne of Judah.
That's right.
But there will be.
There will be.
And it's David's descendant, Jesus, that will occupy that throne in Jerusalem during the millennium. It's all in the Bible.
It's all in the Bible.
All you have to do is read it with common sense and set aside this nonsense that God is done with the Jewish people.
No, he's not.
The Apostle Paul talks about this in the book of Romans. I think it's Romans 8, 9, and 10, or 9, 10, and 11. I think it's 9, 10, 11. He hammers this point home that God has set the Jews aside for a period of time. But he's not done with them.
No.
He's going to regather them, bring them back in, and establish them in their own land. But it's going to come at a price. And the price is going to be this tribulation period under the Antichrist. There are Christians who don't believe the church will be out of here. There's like 3 different takes on that. One says we're out of here before the tribulation, the Antichrist. Another theology says we're going to be out of here in the middle of it. Another one says the church won't be out of here till Jesus finally returns at the end. If you set aside replacement theology and recognize that God is not done with the Jewish people, he's got hundreds of promises concerning them in the end time. As soon as you start reading those with a common sense understanding, you don't have to be an engineer. All you have to do is read it with common sense, and you're going to understand that the church will be out of here before the Great Tribulation. And the focus then turns to the Jewish people.
That's right, the 144,000.
Well, there's going to be a number of prophecies that are going to have to be fulfilled through the Jews, but the whole lens of end time prophecy. Isn't it what's going to happen to America? Isn't it what's going to happen to the church? The whole lens of end time prophecy is filtered through the filter of the Jewish people.
Jews, yes.
And
yes.
he's already been moving on them. From post-World War II on, bringing them back into Israel, establishing their nation, reclaiming Jerusalem in the 1967 war. Now, President Trump, when he was in office, he recognized Jerusalem as their capital and moved our embassy. That was huge, and that was biblical. And that's one of the reasons it's got such opposition and so much criticism, because it has been Satan's design since the beginning to wipe out the Jewish people. And there's a point where he thinks he's going to win, but he's not. There's a war on the horizon.
There's a war.
Described in Ezekiel 38, 39. It's a famous war among Bible scholars, and it will be a kind of a surprise attack against Israel, not by our neighbors, but by some remote countries. Those countries will be led by Russia. It will include Turkey. It will include Iran, probably Syria, Libya. And this is all outlined in the Bible in Ezekiel 38, 39. Russia put a base in Syria about 10 years ago under the Obama administration when there was problems over there. During the period of time when Russia is now invading Ukraine, a couple weeks ago, he had one of his military leaders consulting with people in Syria. I'm not saying this is going to happen next week, but it's imminent. All the chess pieces are in place. And it looks like that will be a nuclear exchange. If you read Ezekiel 39, it will outline the cleanup after that battle. And I don't think there's going to be a nuclear war against Israel that won't include the United States. I don't think we're going to be able to stay out of that. I wanted to read just a couple of quick prophecies that have to do with God's plans for Israel.
Come on.
And why that whole nonsense of replacement theology needs to be set aside. That grew out of the tension between the Jews and the Christian church, and then the church under Constantine and the Catholic Church went crazy with it, and Martin Luther was no better. They basically persecuted the Jews for a long time and took the position that it was the Jews that crucified Jesus, completely missing the point that we all crucified him. But here's a couple of the prophecies. This one's in Isaiah 11:12. He says, I will raise a flag among the nations for Israel to rally around. He will gather the scattered people of Judah from the ends of the earth. Well, Isaiah 27:6, the time is coming when my people will take root. Israel will bud and blossom and fill the whole earth with her fruit. Here's another one, Isaiah 43. Do not be afraid, for I'm with you. I'll gather you and your children from the east and the west, from the north and the south. I'll bring my sons and daughters back to Israel from the distant corners of the earth. All who claim me as their God will come, for I've made them for my glory. It was I who created them. And then this is one I referenced earlier. Who has ever seen or heard anything as strange as this? Has a nation ever been born in a single day? Has a country ever come forth in a mere moment? But by the time Jerusalem's birth pains begin, the baby will be born and the nation will come forth. May 14th, 1948. So if you don't take the Bible literally, all I could do is encourage you to start. Read it with some common sense, and try and set aside a lot of one of the problems is, if we're going to get at the truth of anything, we have to be challenged what we've come to believe and what we've been fed, then apply evidence for and against that. Then we need to apply a standard to that evidence to find out if it's true. And one of the problems we have is the two weakest standards we apply to what little evidence we have. Those standards are either our feelings, or our traditions.
That's right.
And that needs to all be challenged. If you're going to apply a standard, apply the standard of the Word of God.
That's right. And
become a student of it. Because as soon as you do that and start reading it with common sense, it's going to just open itself to you. And you're going to grow. And that's what we're trying to do. And I would not take my word for anything that we're saying here tonight.
That's right.
You can check everything out.
Check out this book is alive. This book is alive. Take the time out and read it. I hope today's message that we brought to you all, are we in the end times? I believe so. And we don't know the day or the hour when the Lord gonna come and call the saints. And I just pray for those that are on the other side who are listening. You know, if you never prepared yourself for anything in your life, this will be the time to prepare yourself to repent and give your life to Christ. And start to live through this word every day. And it's time. I sure would hate for any of us to miss the boat. And I don't care what your preferences are, what you do.